Hi, Gunther.
Hey, Mike.
We've been discussing the best way to blend our experience and knowledge regarding Tai Chi. You have many years of experience. I have quite a few myself. So we have a lot of ground we could possibly cover, but I want to make sure that we keep the focus on what our audience would be interested in this new training. Maybe if you'd like, you can start us off.
Great. Well, let's begin with a broader question, which is actually highlighted by the title of the 8 agreements, where you, in parentheses, you have the word or words "not doing." So I'd like to begin with that. It kind of establishes like a Taoist context for our conversation. Then we can go into the specifics.
Okay.
So I'm curious. This is it's not it's a bit of an academic question, but it also has a very practical aspect to it, and that is, isn't there an inherent contradiction in teaching methods or habits of cultivating Wu Wei, or not doing, or effortless effort? So how do you approach the resolution of that apparent contradiction at the level of mind, body, and energy practices, especially developing skills of power pushing and short power, which are very, methodical and intentional and causal? So I'm curious how you would resolve that particular, at least apparent, paradox or ambiguity.
Yeah. First of all, you've studied very deeply the Eastern practices and philosophies. So if you and I engaged in this discussion, we might be using terms that aren't necessarily familiar to our audience. And in my effort to connect with the baseline consciousness, understanding, skill level of your average Tai Chi practitioner, but also of the advanced Tai Chi practitioner, I had to blend the Chinese ideas with modern ideas. I ran a behavioral analysis on the habits or the patterns of your everyday Tai Chi practitioner. And that's where we came up with the 8 saturated habits, 8 habits that we do too much of these days, which has sort of led to a stagnation of inquiry. So from a behavioral point of view, what the 8 agreements amount to is identification of 8 predominant habits of your everyday practitioner, and then to introduce advanced habits that I must say all accomplished Tai Chi practitioners use already. In the same way that Stephen Covey talks about the 7 habits of highly successful people, he's helping the public become aware of the habits of successful people already. And I'm doing the same here. This is not a new doctrine. In other words, you, with your many, many decades of Tai Chi training and having lived to a ripe age of 85, no doubt already implement some of these 8 advanced habits. And in your case, when you take the course, it may be different from the 3-year student. For you, it would be an invitation to examine your current practice to see if you can identify within this list of the 8 advanced habits which ones you are already incorporating. One quick example would be the feminine learning versus the masculine learning. You clearly don't belong to that masculine learning camp. Maybe you did it in your early days, but that's not my impression right now. It's more synthetic. It's more non-performance or external ego success oriented, as much as your practice is firmly centered in the inner process. So that's just one simple example of, if you look back, you go, yeah, I already do the feminine learning. But for the less experienced practitioner, the 8 not doings is simply introducing 8 advanced habits to take the place of, it could even be temporarily, of the old habit. For example, medicine instead of will. We all know what will is. We all know that it requires discipline and dedication to train. But the misassumption is that all I need to do is to train and I should get the results. We both know that that isn't guaranteed, that there's a qualitative factor that's needed in addition to just doing the form day in, day out, for example, or even pushing hands day in, day out. And that's where we introduce medicine as the inner architecture that will drive a person to more self-reflection of their inner process, of their motivations, for example, rather than just externally training, expecting, hoping that progress, that high attainment of the young legends will be attained. That's not the case.
Well, let me push on you a little bit more with respect to this particular question of not doing or wu wei, because there, in some kind of odd way, it may be that this is less of an issue for beginners than it would be for more advanced practitioners.
That's right.
Just by virtue of the habits that we accumulate over many years with whatever successes or failures we have.
That's right.
So, but are you referring here, when you use this phrase of not doings, to an attitude, to a way of an approach to learning, or what is the quality that differentiates a not doing approach versus a doing approach? Because I mean, one could make the argument that not doing could apply to the standard habits as well as to the new ones. So what, again, I'm pressing you a little bit here as to how you would clarify for our viewers here, what do we actually mean by not doing?
By not doing, I'm imposing a behavioral strategy, behavior-based strategy. What we normally do, if we focus on the solo form, we have the G power pushing ahead of the solo form as agreement number 1. What I mean is I agree to implement this, or my partner and I agree to implement this, or the students in my school, the community agrees to implement. That's all agreements means. But there's a consciousness, there's a deliberate break from the conventional way of approaching Tai Chi. That if I just keep getting corrections on the form, if I keep doing the form, if I keep reflecting on the form, that it will at some point yield fruit. And in reintroducing this forgotten core practice of the young family, the G power pushing, my proposal is that in one fell swoop, it will immediately resolve so many questions about the solo form, because you're going to be actually applying your whole body power out, and you're going to learn how to recruit all that, and not just some static push, but also, if you look down the list, see if I can just pull that up just for now. If we look down the list to short power ahead of long power, or just say short power, which is the close range combat, those two together are needed. That's what the original family did. They didn't just do pushing, nor did they just do combat. They're a yin-yang complement. In other words, as you build this remarkable Fantan Li by installing new habits into your Tai Chi practice, you're going to also benefit from knowing how it's actually used in a peak mastery, when you become a master, not where I am necessarily now, but where I want to go in the future. And that's where we're using situational combat awareness scenarios to run you through new repertoires of how the Youngs would, for example, chusho, bring the hand out, or how they would use their fingers and to apply deadly force in self-defense. So to have that knowledge in your mind, in your experience, almost like walking on coals, you get this peak experience through this training that you don't necessarily have yet, but that impresses upon you such a deep sense of connection with the original, that this habit we have of just pushing and exerting long power gets replaced by this, with this knowledge and understanding. So I'm not saying that after a 30-day intensive, you'll have the ability to apply it like in real life. Maybe you could, depending on your level. For those who have a lot of experience, I think this will be really quick. But at the same time, it's such a different mindset, this idea of your power being such a strong, expansive structure, that I think only this training can bring out. So just to stay on point, the deliberate disruption of long power with short power, the deliberate disruption of our habit of relying conceptually, not just physically, but in our belief system on the solo form that'll deliver. Let's replace that with this essential exercise and so forth and so on. We're just replacing them. And in doing so, we are not doing that. It's not so esoteric at this realm. Remember?
Yes.
Yeah. So you and I can go on and on about Wu Wei.
Well, thank you for that. If I may make a suggestion here, Mike, I think possibly a better phrase than not doing here, it would be, at least at the introductory level, would be like something like pattern interruption. In clinical hypnosis, there is a tradition of, the Ericksonian tradition of interrupting patterns.
Yeah.
As a way of opening up the mind for new learnings and so on. So I think from what you're describing here, it's closer to that than to the more esoteric idea of non-self, if you will.
Yeah, and the early predecessor of what you're referring to is, of course, BMOD, behavior modification, right, from the early psychology. Yes. And that's all. It's just pattern disruption, basically. Even monitoring eating habits with your chart is a disruption. It doesn't have to be a literal. The reason I'm smiling is because that's what I had originally. I was using psychological terms, but I didn't want to come off as some psychologist. So I thought I would introduce is it called a non-sequester? I don't know.
Non-sequitur.
Yeah, is it?
Yeah.
I introduced something that was meaningful but not meaningful, sort of like that would catch the attention.
Yes.
Well, but you caught me. But you caught me.
Well, I think that it's always useful if you're introducing new terms. One of the risks of that is that the associations that people have to certain phrases carry with them, and that can block the understanding of what you're trying to convey. So in my case, I brought a certain amount of baggage of my own to effortless effort or non-doing, because I have a set of associations with that.
Right.
And I suspect probably some other people do, probably not the majority, but certainly some. So anyway, it's something worth considering in terms of.
Thank you. Yeah, like I said, I was actually in your camp until I said, why don't I fancy this up a little bit and to raise eyebrows, which I obviously did with you. Yes. And it led to this this insight that you're sharing with us. And also, let's just say in the Tongbi, self-repair, that is going to be introduced under posture to offset the negative stress-based patterns of holding the turtle back or the flat back posture to open the feminine, the shoulders and the chest, so that the heart and lung can breathe. The end attainment of that inquiry is wu-yi, is not knowing, because and with that is wu-wei, not doing. So it's I cover it in the authentic sense in other aspects of the work. This was just a joke. That might be backfiring as we speak.
Well, I'm sincerely not playing gotcha, and that's not my intention here.
No.
So, but in the spirit of trying to clarify ideas, again, people bring their own baggage to every new learning situation.
But does this lay to rest your question? I mean, I'm speaking in psychological terms.
Yes.
It's really a psychological not doing. I like drinking at the end of each day. I'm just not going to do it tonight.
Yes. Well, another way I would see this is you're bringing out the complementary aspect of the polarity that's been ignored. So, for example, in the contemporary scene, the solo form is kind of the standard criterion, right? And people spend years refining the solo form. One of the things I've said on occasion is, give me a professional dancer, okay? And let me spend a day with her, and I'll teach her like the opening sequence of the Yang style long form, and she'll take a couple of days of practice, and I can put her on a stage. And she'll look better than 99% of the people who are doing the form. But that doesn't mean she has any internal understanding or any kung fu or any realization. It's all on the surface level.
Yeah.
So what I see you doing here is you're bringing out the complementary aspect of that. So in a sense, as you're looking at the internal dynamics through the lens of power pushing and short power, and saying this needs to be emphasized very early in the training, if not at the beginning,
right?
In order to establish the right balance of yin and yang, And what I hear you saying is that this was emphasized by Yang Xiaojun